Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 81, Furious Fairies. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the novel Fablehaven by Brandon Mull. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
New in my writing world. I wish I had more new to talk about. Still working on editing for Zara 2. Wasn't a hugely productive week this week. I have disc degeneration in my neck.
Oh,
And sometimes that's like really painful, so it makes it hard to focus on things. So I had some of that going on over the past week, a little more pain than usual, so wasn't able to be very productive, unfortunately. Yeah, other than that, that's all my focus right now is just getting Zara 2 done. What about you?
and editing isn't like, for me, I can write and sometimes I can dictate, and I frequently dictate my writing. And so you can do that, lying down or not in a sitting position to help sort of take care of something that hurts, but you can't really do that for editing. You kind of have to be sitting up
I
and
haven't
looking
found a
at
way
it.
yet.
Yeah. Well, I hope that you feel better. In my writing world, I just am doing plotting and some editing and writing. So I'm at 22% on Meridian, which is book 3 in the Adventures of the Empyrean Guard, my space opera science fiction series. Other than that, that's what's been going on in my week. My week has been a little bit chaotic as well, as my offspring has returned to higher education. And so I am the Uber.
Yeah.
So that takes a couple of hours a day out of my writing time. But so far it's been manageable. I've been able to do what I plan to do for the most part. And as soon as we get back into that rhythm, I expect things to be picking back up. So, yeah.
Good.
So what interesting stories have you come across in books or movies or television?
Let's see. Not too much. I did rewatch the movie The Cabin in the Woods,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm guessing you probably haven't seen because it's a
No.
horror movie.
Right.
It's fantastic. I love that movie. It's so glorious.
What makes it glorious?
You kind of need to see other movies like that. Like this sort of cabin in the woods idea is kind of a subgenre in horror. It usually involves a group of people, typically teenagers, who go to this cabin in the woods, right? They're going there for, to have fun for the weekend or whatever. And then something awful happens. There's like demons are summoned, or zombies come and get them, or a slasher killer comes, or a virus is unleashed. There's something, right? There's all these different variations of things that happen at these cabin in the woods. So this movie kind of plays with a lot of those tropes. It's a similar type story, but it doesn't, I wouldn't say it makes fun of those movies, but it plays with them. So it's one of those stories, but it's also humorous and over the top, and things just get crazy. It's a really fun movie, but you kind of need to be familiar with that subgenre first, I think, to really fully appreciate it. So yeah,
Okay.
I rewatched that. That was fun.
Good.
That's about it. That's the only thing. And then, of course, the book that we are discussing today. What have you been watching or reading?
I too have been focusing on reading Fablehaven for today's podcast. Still reading the second book in that Star Wars trilogy by Timothy Zahn, enjoying that.
Oh, yeah.
And also, as of the recording of this podcast, the second season of Rings of Power has been, well, I want to say released, but it's started. I think the first 3 episodes are available. So I'm trying to think about when would be the opportune time to sit down and watch that, because we are going to talk about the Rings of Power, but we're not going to talk about it until the end of October because, and we're very excited to tell our listeners about this, we have dedicated October to the works of Edgar Allan Poe. And so we're really looking forward to Poetober, where we're going to talk about some of the stories and some of the poems. So I think we decided on The Pit and the Pendulum and The Raven and The Fall of the House of Usher and Annabel Lee. And along with those, during Poetober, we're also going to talk about a few scary, Halloween-y type television series as well. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to digging in and getting back to reading Poe stories. And so I'm trying to figure out when to watch The Rings of Power so that I can work around the coolness of Poetober. Other than that, that's it.
Forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
In my local writing group, we always try to do some type of horror short story that we write each year, and then we critique in October. Usually we keep it pretty short, try to keep it less than like 10 pages maybe. So,
yeah.
And I always look forward to those, but hopefully I'll have time to get to that this year, right? While I'm still finishing Zara 2.
So speaking of Cabin in the Woods, are you ready to talk about Fablehaven?
Yeah, let's do it.
Today we're talking about the story told in the novel Fablehaven by Brandon Mull, and I will read the blurb on the back of the book. For centuries, mystical creatures were gathered into a hidden refuge called Fablehaven to prevent their extinction. The sanctuary is one of the last strongholds of true magic. Enchanting? Absolutely. Exciting? You bet. Safe? Well, actually quite the opposite. Kendra and her brother Seth have no idea that their grandfather is the current caretaker of Fablehaven. Inside the gated woods, ancient laws keep order among greedy trolls, mischievous satyrs, plotting witches, spiteful imps, and jealous fairies. However, when the rules get broken, powerful forces of evil are unleashed, and Kendra and her brother must face the greatest challenge of their lives to save their family, Fablehaven, and perhaps even the world. Did you like this book?
Yeah, it's a fun book. I think it's probably middle grade would be my guess, where the age range is aimed at. This is a fun concept. It's a cool idea. I like the childlike sense of wonder that this book has. I think that's imperative in particularly middle grade fantasy stories, but also in any fantasy. I think that's an important element, but more so here. And I think that it evokes that sense of wonder pretty well. There's a lot of creativity here. I really like the idea of a world that we don't see. This story is kind of a portal, right? It's just stuff is just all around them.
Okay,
but they can't see it, until, in this case, drinking of the milk. I think it's a fun story. The characters are fairly simple and straightforward, but I think that's okay for a middle grade story. There's no need to get super deep, right? It's more about the world and the events that are unfolding, the idea, the characters and the creatures that come up. So I think it folds into that pretty well. I liked that the children often think about what they're doing. Sometimes, not all the time. They discuss the pros and cons of decisions that they have to make, especially sort of in the latter half of the story when things start becoming more serious. And we get to see distinctions between Kendra and Seth, with Seth obviously being brash and impulsive and Kendra being more wary and more of a rule follower. So it's good to have, it's like a dichotomy, right? It's like you've got these two people who are very different in that in the way that matters for this story. And I think that he highlighted that well. And I like that there are consequences for their actions, even though, some of it may be undone or fixed. I think that's okay. We get to see that, you do this thing and something really bad could happen. So I like that. I also thought the sibling relationship felt very genuine. There's a lot of teasing that goes on right back and forth, but you can tell that they still care for each other, and they want each other to be safe, obviously. And we do get to see character growth. I think it's more for Kendra than Seth, but I think as the story wraps up, you kind of see that it's her story, and that points us to the theme, I think, because of her character development. So yeah, overall, I thought it's a fun story. It doesn't, it doesn't blow me away. It's not like mind-bogglingly inventive or anything like that, but it has a cool idea. It's easy to get into. It's fun. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think there's things that could be improved, but we'll get to that. What about you? What did you like it overall, and what aspects do you like?
It was okay. I agree with you. The concept is wonderful. This idea of this place preserving mythical creatures, even though they're dangerous, like you might preserve endangered animals, even though they're dangerous or they're not cute and fuzzy, the way people usually like to, support endangered animals. These are not cute and fuzzy, but they still need to be preserved. And so I love that idea of taking on that responsibility and preserving these creatures. And I think the world building was absolutely brilliant. Like you said, it was just extraordinary, the amount of detail and the amount of thought that went into what this world could be like and should be like in order to make it a truly immersive experience. I thought that was phenomenal. I agree. This was Kendra's story. We start with her voice in the first chapter. We end with her voice at the end. And she is instrumental in resolving the crisis that faces Fablehaven, which I think is a really wonderful sort of journey for her because, like you said, she's a rule follower. And so she is going to listen to the rules that she's given. She's going to follow them. And she actually figures out a way to, I don't know if she just breaks the rules, but finds a way to get through the rules to accomplish the goal. And I thought that was very well done as well. I was not that crazy about Seth's character, and we can talk about that a little bit more in the improvement section. That caught me up a couple of times as I was reading, and probably because of that, and to a lesser degree, Grandpa's character.
Yeah.
I probably won't move forward in this series, much to my offspring's chagrin, who really enjoyed this series. But yeah, so overall, though, and clearly it's a very popular series, so this story speaks to people, a lot of people who really love it. And I can understand why, because again, it's immersive, creative, beautiful world building. The characters are realistic. And so it's easy to just really jump in and stay in this world. So I can totally understand why this is a popular series.
Yeah, and I think it's the idea like there's this magic within the world, right? It's kind of sort of that Harry Potter thing. There's this other realm that exists in your world that you don't know about. And also like Harry Potter, it has a lot of elements that we're already familiar with, fairies and ogres and trolls. Like we already know these things. So it's easy to relate to them. I think that helps as well.
So let's talk about what we might change as a writer.
You touched upon something with the characters, with Seth and the grandfather. I thought the grandfather character is kind of funny. I thought he was fairly irresponsible, actually. Don't go into the woods because there's ticks there. It's like that's the best you could come up with for this potentially lethal consequences. And likewise, don't look out the window tonight. Bad things could happen. Like again, like that's all you're gonna do is just tell them that and then hope nothing bad happens. Yeah, so that was those are they felt very like plot how to say it? Like they were there just for the
It was
plot.
plot conveniences, yeah.
Yeah, convenience. Yeah, exactly. So I would have had something. I would have made it more so you could, or so that the consequences. The grandfather was more specific about the dangers of these things and tried to put obstacles in place to really prevent them, protect the kids more, and still something bad happened. Right. I think that would have been more believable. It wasn't necessarily the worst thing, but for me, it really stood out. It's like, geez, this is, I think that's all you're doing is just tell them about that when they could die. And then we saw the consequences of that in the last act, right? When they got captured and everything almost went up in smoke. So that's one of the things. Seth, I'll let you talk about, because obviously you have some thoughts about that. And I probably agree with most of them. See, starting from the beginning, kind of going through some notes I had as I was reading it, I would have shrunk the first chapter. I listened to this on audio, and that first chapter was just like so repetitive, and it just seemed to drag. I mean, it was only the first chapter. It wasn't that bad, but it just seemed like, okay, let's get into this story. It was like, oh, we got to go over here. We're going to do this. We're going to take you there. I don't know. I just wanted that to move and get me into the story a lot quicker. And I think there's no reason that it couldn't have been done that way. Also, from a story, not motivation, from a story like propulsion standpoint, I would have given Seth and Kendra wants or goals earlier on in the story. It kind of rambled for a while as they kind of just explored, which I guess was kind of, the setup for the story is like, here's this place. They're sort of learning about it as they go. And that's fine. And it's probably okay for a younger audience. But for me, I wanted there to be a little bit more narrative drive. So I would have given them something, even if it was just small, and only led them into the adventures that they were going to have. Because overall, the story felt fairly unstructured to me until the final act. Once the grandfather was taken, then they had very concrete, clear goals, right? And they had to make
that's a great point.
And they had to make very tough decisions. And I think that for me, that's when the story really started to shine. Was the last act. It was like, okay, things are happening, but this is a personal preference, right? How would I improve it? It's almost always how would I improve it for me. I like the story to have a lot more drive and pacing that makes me wonder, like, okay, what's going to happen next? What are these characters going to do? Rather than what's the next thing they stumble into, right? Which is kind of how it felt in the early part of the story. I thought the whole milking of the cow scene was a weird choice. For me, I wouldn't have had that in the story at all. It added nothing for me. It was just weird. And then I guess I will touch on Seth just briefly. Even though he suffered particularly serious consequences for his choices early on, it didn't seem to affect his decision making. Right? He still kept making rash decisions. So that's all I'm going to say on him. I feel like though the story was fun, it did feel Harry Potterish in the sense of just mashing together a bunch of things we were already familiar with, right? You have witches and trolls and golems and ogres and fairies. Kind of like Harry Potter's sort of Halloween fantasy. I think we mentioned that previously, where it's like they're flying around on brooms and there's the ghosts roaming in the castle and things like that. So it kind of felt like that to me, which again is fine for this age. For me, I like to come up with new things. So I would have added some more creatures of my own making. They did have the Octobear thing at the end, which I thought was kind of fun. I would have put more things in it like that. For me, that adds to a sense of wonder. So you have some touchstones with things we already know, and then do additional creatures or other magical things. Again, that's just what I like. And then there was a part later in the story where their grandmother was explaining the rules of what they could do and how the Fablehaven places worked. And it just felt like a lot of exposition that ground the story to a halt. I would have either sprinkled some of that throughout the story or even just omitted some of it for the sake of continuing with the action. I don't think we necessarily needed it all in this book. There's obviously more to come and it's left open for additional stories. Some of that stuff could have just been left for then. Anyway, let's hear what you have. How would you improve this story?
You touched on what my frustration was with Seth was, you were turned into a big blubbery walrus by the fairies that
Yeah,
you offended, and you learned nothing.
right.
It just seemed very unrealistic that a human person would not be somehow changed at least a little bit by that experience. And I think it would have been really helpful if, for example, when the next sort of mistake happened, it was the opening of the window to the crying toddler. That would have been helpful if it was actually Kendra who did that. She was the one drawn by. They found his weakness was trying to imitate the fairy hunter. And so he was going to be a great fairy hunter too, not realizing what the consequences would be. Her weakness would be, oh, we've got to help because she's an oldest sibling. That might be her kind of personality leaning is to be, compassionate and wanting to take care. And
Yeah, that would have been good.
to me, that would have made a lot more sense for her to open that window instead of Seth, who then to me was like, wow, what does it take for you to learn? The other thing that I found frustrating was that there appeared to be, and correct me if I missed something because I may have, there appeared to be this conflicting messaging from Grandpa. Follow the rules, but I've been waiting for someone to break the rules so I could figure out who's going to take over Fablehaven next. That's what it kind of felt like, right? Dale told them not to drink the milk, but Seth drank the milk anyway, and then Grandpa rewarded them. And he left this breadcrumb of clues for them to follow to figure things out. It seemed like it was conflicting. Follow these rules. This is dangerous, but here, let me give you this mystery to solve that might also be dangerous. It was just weird. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did I miss something?
No, you didn't. I definitely felt the same thing. And now that you're mentioning it, might have made more sense if he had said, "Here's these things that are off limits. They're very dangerous." Maybe even kept it vague, but then said, "If by the end of your stay here, you show that you're worthy of things, then I can reveal things to you." And then they could have gotten the messages and gone through the thing like they did, and it would have made more sense. Because right now you're right.
That's a good idea.
Right now you're right. It's like completely conflicting. It was like drink the milk. I'm like, is this a trap? Was this like didn't the grandfather set this up for her to find? Why is he telling them to do the thing which he's been warning them against doing? I mean, he didn't warn them specifically against drinking the milk, but like you said, it was all about follow my rules, don't step out of bounds. And then
it was Dale who said, don't drink the milk. Dale was trying to hide it. And, he was discouraging. And so you have, these adults who are giving them instructions, and then you have other instructions that are essentially saying, ignore the adults. Right. Anyway, it was just, to me, that was very conflicting messaging there about, and I agree with you. I think you summed it up really well when you said this, the story was kind of a little bit muddled until that last act, and then the last act really, I liked what you said, shone. You're right, the last act shone. So let's talk about theme. You did derive a theme from this story. I did too. I'd be interested in hearing if they're similar.
Yeah, my theme was, this would be no surprise, related to Kendra's growth. And I think I was trying to make it sort of a generalized thing. So what I came up with, obviously, it's about her acquiring the courage to do what needed to be done. I think for me, it came down to you have to be willing to risk your own life to save the ones you love. I think there's more specific stuff about magic and things like that in there, but that's sort of the general thing that I came up with. What do you have?
Wow, we did come up with something different. I came up with be true to yourself. And the reason that I landed on that was because, as you said, Kendra was the rule follower. And so frequently in stories like this, it's the rule breaker who's the hero and who is the one that solves the problem by breaking the rules. I mean, Harry Potter, let's take Harry Potter. He is a rule breaker. Yeah, he, does his best. But in the end, he's going out of bounds. He's getting past the three-headed dog, even though he's supposed to stay off the third floor. I mean, he's a rule breaker. And he's a hero.
He doesn't care about the rules at all.
So I think he does sometimes. But we have here Kendra, who is really trying to keep to the rules and do what she's supposed to do. And because she has done that, she is the only member of the family who's able to move freely during that third act when everybody else has been taken captive. And even when she devises her solution, she does it by doing so without breaking the rules. I mean, she does go to the lake, but by this point, all of Fablehaven is open to her because she's magically protected. She's trying to find a way to save her family, but she's still trying to do so within the rules. And she's the hero because of that. And so I kind of pulled from that, be true to yourself. Her truth to herself is, I want to be someone who does what I know is right, and following the rules is right to me. So I that's what I kind of got from it.
I like that. I have a question for you on that. In the end, well, not in the end, but in the climactic sequence or lead up to it, where she's on the island, she's leaving the island, and I forget the thing's name, the puppet thing that comes after her.
Mondigo, I think it was, or Mondingo?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. She pulls off its arms, right? Is that an act, would that trigger the monsters to be able to go after her because she attacked one of them, or was that outside of that? I
think it did.
If it did or not.
Yeah, I think it did. I think she made a conscious decision, and that was another really interesting thing, right? Because as you point out, Grappa didn't tell them anything. Well, once she understood what the rules are, she made a conscious decision to put herself in danger by doing that. I think you're right. I've got the book here. I'm going to see.
I wasn't sure if in that moment. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
The moment her protection. Okay, let's see. Oh, she was afraid that actually making the elixir was going to be performing magic.
Right.
And so she knew that was going to break her magical protection. So once no, because she actually disarmed.
Yeah, she disarmed him.
Yeah, I think it did take her to a place where but it was also a very conscious decision, and I still think it was true to herself. So I'm gonna go with that. What do you think?
I guess I didn't understand in that moment why she chose to do that. I felt like some explanation would have been in order there,
yeah,
she was doing this because she was trying to push him into the water so he couldn't follow her. Or something like that, because that now it almost seemed out of spite.
And I think it is there, but it's very short. It's something a bit essentially like once she created this magical concoction, she would no longer be magically protected. He'd be following her, and then he'd be able to attack her. So she needed to disarm him before she did that magic. But of course, disarming him, I think, did the same thing.
I thought even after she created the elixir, he still couldn't touch her.
Well, no. By the time she created the elixir, he was in with the naiads.
Oh, it was a different order.
Yeah. So what are your takeaways?
My takeaway is, don't forget the value of having wonder in your story, especially if it's a fantasy story in particular. That's what I
have something very simpler. Yeah, okay. I've got something very about pay attention of the world building to really give the reader that immersive experience.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the novel Fablehaven by Brandon Mull. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we start the run-up to Potober with stories related to magic. Next time we'll be talking about the movie, The Portable Door. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.